My name is Mary Tezak, and I'm the Chief of Staff at Millions of Conversations. We'd like to welcome you to our event, Across County Lines. I would like to begin by introducing Caleb Harper, who is the Program Coordinator at the STAND Coalition in Scott County, Tennessee.
Hi, everyone. Like Mary said, I'm the Program Coordinator at the STAND Coalition, which is a coalition of community organizations that have coalesced together to fight substance abuse disorder in Scott County, Tennessee. And we do that through a number of programs, including our Drug Endangered Children program, which is building a collaborative framework around law enforcement, child welfare agencies, and mental health organizations to fight for drug endangered children and to protect them and their families. And of course, our Youth Service Learning Initiative, which engages students in discussions in classes, talking about ways to combat alcohol, tobacco, and other drug abuse, and giving them the tools to understand adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And the YSLI Coalition also does a lot of service projects around the community, working in food pantries, shelters, and getting involved in any way they can. And then we also have a YSLI board that kind of coordinates that, and those are students from our community, from the two high schools, and two of our panelists are actually members on that. And with that, I'd like to throw it back to Mary.
Awesome. So for those of you who do not know, Millions of Conversations is a national organization headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. Our mission is to bring Americans together by uniting Americans around common values for a shared future. This event is the second installment of our 2021 Conversationalist Series. I would like to thank STAND for being such an incredible partner in helping organize this event. Before we begin, I will read aloud our pledge to listen, which is our current campaign, and I ask that everyone please take the pledge as well. I pledge to listen to you. Will you listen to me? I pledge to listen to others who hold different opinions, views, or beliefs. I will try to understand their reasons and their perspectives and will respectfully express my own in return. Cameron has also linked the pledge in the chat. As a reminder, this event is being recorded and will be distributed on our social media. If you would like to turn off your camera, use an alias, or remove your last name from your Zoom profile, please do so now. The first hour of this event will be a discussion among our panelists, and in the last 30 minutes, each participant will be placed in a facilitated breakout room so that everyone can have a chance to participate in this discussion. Over the last 2 months, these high school students have been meeting once a week to get to know one another and reach a goal of mutual understanding. The issues that they will discuss today affect communities across the United States, and our hope is that this discussion will leave all of us thinking about ways to collaborate for possible solutions. I would like to give a huge thank you to Nia, Michael, Mayowa, Allie, Amelia, and Marlie for all of their work. This event is self-moderated, but I will begin by asking the panelists to introduce themselves with the following question. Briefly describe your community and the environment that you come from. What does it look like, and what was it like to grow up there? What is your favorite thing about where you live? Amelia, let's start with you.
Hi, my name is Amelia Terry, and I am a senior at Oneida High School. I grew up in Oneida, Tennessee, which is a pretty small environment. There is now less than 100 in my high school graduating class. Community-wise, pretty much everyone knows everyone, so that comes with its pros and its cons. As Caleb mentioned, I'm part of the YSLI board. I'm the president of the Youth Governing Board. Allie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Allie Bailey. I'm also from Scott County, but I'm on the opposite end that Amelia's on. I'm from Robbins, and it's super, super small. I go to the other high school in the county. I go to Scott High, and Amelia goes to Oneida. At Scott High, there's about 162 of us, I think, in the graduating class, and it's pretty much everything that Amelia said. Everyone knows everyone. So, Nia, I'll pass it on over to you.
Hi, my name is Nia Adeogun. I currently reside in Katy, Texas, and I go to a public high school with my graduating class being about 800 students, 750, about that. So I go to a very big high school. Growing up in Katy, there's a lot of diversity, especially in the recent years, and it's really exciting to see the change that's been going, especially since I've been growing up here, and I'm really excited to discuss it with all of y'all. Thank you. I'm going to pass this to Mayowa.
Hi, my name is Mayowa Kassim. I'm a senior at University School of Nashville. I live in Brentwood, Tennessee, which is part like kind of a suburban area of Tennessee, but I mostly commute and stay in the Nashville area. But one of my favorite parts about Brentwood is probably the open space and the open areas that exist there for like walking and like hiking. I'll pass it over to Michael.
Hello, I'm Michael Gordon. I go to University School of Nashville, which is a small private school in Nashville. Obviously, live in Nashville. It's a pretty diverse place. It can be self-segregating sometimes, but generally pretty diverse. Part of the Jewish community there. And I think my favorite thing about Nashville is I think the old adage about like Southern people being friendly, I think that's true. I think generally people are pretty friendly here. So I'll pass it to Marlie.
Hey y'all, I'm Marlie Thompson. I use she, her pronouns. I am from Birmingham, Alabama, or right outside of it. And I'm a senior at a private school that's pretty small. Our graduating class is about 60. But Birmingham is actually the biggest city in Alabama. It's got a lot of metropolitan areas, but it's also got a lot of really cool suburbs. Each suburb and each place has got its own personality. So I really like how kind of diverse it is, kind of a melting pot. And I think it's a really great mix between metropolitan city and kind of suburbia. So yeah.
Awesome. I think that was everyone that introduced themselves. So I'm going to go ahead and start with our first question, which is, what is the predominant outlook in your community for what the future of the South should look like? And I'm going to go ahead and pass this to Allie to start us off.
Okay, so I come from the reddest county in a red state, so the most Republican county in Tennessee. For them, or for us, I guess, for Scott County, I feel like it's definitely more of a you honor your parents, you do what they say type of community. We're super, super deep into the Bible Belt here. If I'm not mistaken, I think there are over 200 churches in our community, in our county, and we have not that many people. Like there's a lot of churches here. So I think everything here is deeply rooted in that. And I think, like I said, it's very much a you honor your parents, you do what they say type of community. So I will pass this over to Michael.
I feel like Davidson County, Nashville area, kind of sees ourselves as the, continuation of, in past eras, the South, especially in terms of racial injustice, has kind of seen itself as, well, not seen itself, I guess, but has, served as a place where the effects are most kind of apparent and most like, visual, but also, there's the, furthest and the largest like outcry against it. And it's kind of a bastion of, both progressivism and conservatism at the same time. We see this with, MLK, with Selma, with so many examples in the 1950s and 60s. And so I think kind of Nashville sees itself as kind of a continuation of that. They want to continue and, really work to make the South a better place for everyone. I'll pass it to Marlie next.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what Michael said. Birmingham was a huge place for the civil rights movement. And I think that a lot of us respect that, and we want to move that. We use that as a stepping stone for the places we want to go. But as I said, like each kind of suburb has its own personality. So there are a couple of places that are definitely more conservative than Birmingham, like city. But in the community that maybe I surround myself with, usually the outlook on the future of the South is really good. We really are moving in the right direction. We are one of the few blue counties in Alabama. And I think that's really important. But we are also very deep in the Bible Belt. We have I've had churches try to convert me as well. Like I've had a lot of experience with that, but I also think that we have so much diversity. And I think that's overpowering the kind of deep roots we have in the wrong side of history, I guess. And so I will pass this to Mayowa.
Yeah, I also agree with Michael's characterization. I believe that like Nashville kind of is one of the hot spots of kind of, it's put in an awkward spot in terms of it's a growing city that has a bunch of progressivism and other forms of like organizing for like local organizations that were very active in the outset of the 2020 election that are moving towards more progressive causes, but also kind of me living living in Brentwood, through my commute, I'm also exposed to some of the more conservative elements. For example, like Williamson County, where I reside, it's a predominantly red county, and has low diversity. So I feel like Tennessee is in this form of struggle where we've got metropolitan areas looking for more progressive change versus the very dominant old guard because of Williamson County and other counties in the Tennessee area that are very much trying to continue their old reign and kind of dealing with that in the outset of the 2020 election and other forms like nativism and other trends that have been occurring. I'll pass this over to Amelia.
Yeah, definitely going off of what everyone said about that. As Allie mentioned, from Scott County, we are very Republican, but not only that, we are highly conservative. And with that, I think, and in no way, okay, backstory, my major is psychology, so I've just now started to get into things like that, and I'm in no way this educated to speak on it, but there is something I read, and it really reminded me of my community, and it was about the 4 dimensions of culture, and essentially there's one called uncertainty avoidance, and it's like, we're scared of change, pretty much, and I see that a lot with the older community, and hey, we know that this has worked because our parents did it, we're doing it now, so why would we change what we do? And I think that has a lot to do with hindering kind of the progression that could come for the future of the South, at least where I'm from. If that's it, Michael, do you want to go ahead and start the next question?
Love to. So kind of going off of, the communities, your outlook for the future of the South, and just generally, the communities you come from, what is the meaning of change in your community? How does your community see change occurring? What form, what does change even look like? And then where does it look for, So I will pass to Marlie first.
Yeah, I think this is again like a weird question. I think that it depends all on like what part of Birmingham you're in. It's because there's so many different views. Like we have the whole spectrum here. But I ultimately think that people are afraid of change. I agree that even people who are progressive or like more progressive are afraid of things that are too much change, And a lot of the times you see here is that we make one good change and people are like, all right, that's all work is done. But what they don't realize is that change is constant and that we need to keep progressing. And I think that's mostly what the problem is here. People want change, but they want it to be short-lived and they want it to be easy. And that goes for both sides of the political spectrum. But I think that there's a lot more work to be done and there's no one who wants to do it. So I will pass that to Allie.
Yeah, so this is kind of a simple question for me to answer because in Scott County, change doesn't exist. Like we found how we like to do things and we do it. And so I think that's why people are intimidated by organizations like STAND, especially when you have a group of, high school students who are like, hey, here's what's wrong with our community. Here's what we can do to fix it, but we need your help to do it. And like we've said, we're not only Republican here, everyone is so conservative. It's literally crazy. So I think especially like older generations are terrified of change, but not only that, change when it comes from the youth because we're youth, you know what I mean? So I'll pass this over to Amelia.
Yeah, definitely going off of what Allie said, I do think that change means fear to Scott County. Whenever we do look at our youth program that we've kind of mentioned, we target the youth for sure because we're kind of like starting with the youth so they'll grow up and change it because we've noticed, especially coming from adults too, that whenever you try to talk to other adults, they are already too set in their ways. So part of our program is to start with the youth and build our way up. And we know that that's been a little difficult and very frowned upon by a lot of adults, but also very, very accepted by the youth because they are way more accepting of the change. And definitely going back to what Marlie said too, like change is not easy. And even whenever they say like, hey, we did this one thing and it's getting a little better, let's give up because we're okay. We made a little progress. We can write that down. And I think that's where a lot of the problem is starting to come in. Michael, do you want to keep going?
Sure. I feel like, from the natural living perspective, oftentimes Nashville, and I'm sure Mayowa and Nia and Marlie can kind of back me up on this, feel almost like we're so blue compared to the rest of our states, Alabama, Tennessee, Texas, that it almost feels like we're kind of being held back in a way. And I think a lot of people want to rely on government and want to like use that route for change. But if you look at Tennessee, for example, there's a Republican supermajority, and the only blue seats are from Tennessee and Memphis, Shelby and Davidson counties. And so, like, I think that has kind of led to more of a looking towards like NGOs and nonprofits like Hands on Nashville, Gideon's Army, both did a lot in the aftermath of the tornado we had almost a year ago, I think over a year ago today, and the pandemic and such, regulations wise. But I'm curious, Amelia and Allie, what role do obviously the Bible Belt, what role do churches play in your community in terms of like operating change and helping the community? And then also like, how do you feel about like outsiders coming in and trying to help, whether they're, city slickers from, metro government or something else?
Amelia, do you want to go first?
That's the Amelia, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. So the churches kind of rule it here. Whenever you talk about like stereotypes, pretty much the first thing you're going to say is, oh, well, these people go to this church and they think this, but these people go to this church. And if you don't go to one of those churches, keep your mouth shut. So it's kind of like, that's where our stereotypes do come from. And even like if you go into our schools and you look at the high schools and like who they hang out with and what they think and what they believe, it'll usually go back to either their church or what their parents learned in their church that they are raising their children in their church. So there's pretty much like this same cycle that the churches do play that role, and they kind of are the spokespeople for the entire environment that goes on in Scott County. Allie, if you want to continue that.
You kind of hit it right on the nose. Like I said, there's about I would say like 200 churches in our little county. And Amelia, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I would say there's about 3 or 4 what I would call like super churches who kind of like run everything, even if they're really not supposed to. I really can't add anything. Amelia she hit it right. Just what Amelia said, man. She hit it right on the nose.
Nia, I'm curious to hear your perspective from Katie.
So regarding the question, like, I think that Katie has been forced to change and adapt just because we've had such an influx of like diversity over the past few years. And so like there was no like, oh, I don't want to do that, like I'm not in the headspace. Like, no, it was like, it's happening, you're gonna get used to it, and we're gonna all like move forward together. And I think that was really good for us though, because if like sometimes like I think forced change is like kind of, it helps progress societies, and I think that this was one of them that really benefited from it. And so as far as change goes, I feel like they see it as like a necessary evil in a way. Like they think it's definitely something that we should be doing, but they're not always like super like quick to get on the bandwagon to do it. But by like doing things like this and like, showing them like, hey, there's better ways to handle these things, it's very nice to see that out here. And as far as religion goes, kind of, I think this ties between like Katie and Oneida and everything like that. There's like Catholicism is huge out here. Like it is huge, and it is definitely something that overrules and overruns a lot of our communities, especially mine here in Harris County. Catholicism is very big. You can go to school, like my school, it's 800 kids, but almost probably like 600 of those belong to some sort of church. And it's like, if you're not in that church, then what are you doing? And why haven't you been? Like, just it's crazy. But I mean, to each their own. It's kind of like Michael said, like self-segregated. Like, there's people that go to church and people that don't. And if you don't, then you're just not in that group. But yeah, I think Allie, if you want to go ahead and talk about our next topic.
I'm gonna kind of play off what you said first. Like you said, Catholicism is super big down there. For us, it is the Protestant faiths, like Baptists is the huge one here. Amelia, you agree? Yeah, okay. There, out of the 200 churches in Scott County, I would say about 195 of them are Baptist churches. And they're all kind of Baptist churches that have like split off from one another. And out of the 195 Baptist churches, there are about like 4 that rule everything. So I definitely understand where you're coming from, Nia. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next topic, if that's okay. I want to know what the demographic divide is like in more urban areas, because in Scott County there literally is no diversity at all. So I really want to know what diversity looks like in the more urban communities. So I will pass this on to Mayowa.
Yeah, I guess in terms of Nashville, where I mostly kind of commute, in terms of demographic divides, like there's very much like kind of like in terms of diversity, there's very much Black and brown communities often like kind of like residing around North Nashville in those areas, versus there are areas like Belmead, West End, which have like majority like whiter areas. Those areas also tend to be less heavily incarcerated, as well as more heavily like there's more wealth in those areas. So in terms of the demographic divide in Nashville, you can kind of classify it by race and also class, and those are because of like historical things like redlining and other forms of socioeconomic inequality. And I think that kind of leads to like very much like kind of like just like it feels like different kind of worlds in terms of when you operate in, like when you're going to North Nashville, it feels very different from when you're in areas like Belmead, West End, or even like other Nashville areas. So yeah, I guess I'll pass it on to Nia.
So in Katy, the demographic divide, I feel like when everyone thinks of Texas, first of all, they like to think of like a lot of just Caucasian, just the whole entire state, and that's really not how it is at all. I think there is a huge Black and brown community, especially a Nigerian community out here, like very big Nigerian community. And as a Nigerian, I think I can safe to say that there's just a lot of us that migrate here. So, and I think again, that plays into the whole aspect of like how that change that we were just talking about has just been pushed upon, because as more and more people come and move to Katy, Texas and have a life and establish something great, you know, all of the like original, I guess, like farmland that happened and that was out here has to kind of be like, whoa, there's a lot more people coming and they don't look like me, but we have to, you know, also like assimilate and like know them and make a community out of it. And I think it's gorgeous to see that. But yeah, so the demographic divide is definitely a lot of Caucasian and white, but there's a lot of Black and brown. So I would honestly at this point say it's maybe like 60-40 around that, you know, and 60 leaning on the more like Caucasian side of things and 40 leaving to the Black and brown communities. But yes, that's how it is for me. I'm gonna go pass this to Amelia.
Okay, yeah. So going back to which there's not gonna be much to say about diversity in Scott County, but not only do we not like change, but we don't really have to change. And someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but no one has ever woke up one day and thought, wow, I want to move to Oneida, Tennessee. That is the dreamland. So like there's not a need for them to change. There's not diversity moving in very often. Like if it is, it's at a very slow rate, to the rate where like everyone is shocked or surprised, or they don't know how to handle it. They haven't been around diversity enough to understand it. And that's probably part of like the lack of being able to handle it well. Or sometimes I don't think they realize that they are being inappropriate because there's not education on the subject necessarily. Like if there is someone with a different ethnicity, there is like, I will guarantee you, like, they will say, oh, like we have a new Black kid, instead of just acknowledging the fact that there is a new student at our school, because they're so shocked by someone being slightly different that they don't know how to handle it. Marlie?
Yeah, I think it's definitely like a weird divide. I'm not sure I can call it urban and rural, but kind of suburbia and urban. Because when you go into like inner city Birmingham, you're going to find a lot of diversity. You're going to find Black and brown people. You're going to find Hispanic people. You're going to find a lot of, and like white people, you're going to find a lot of people there. But once you get into suburbia, they're mostly like, most of the suburbs are white. And that again is due to gerrymandering, like Mayowa said. And you know, you find like the rich they're usually rich white neighborhoods, and you sometimes see a scatter of diversity in there, but it's mostly split by socioeconomic status. And more rural areas are, definitely poorer. There's not really many rural areas in Jefferson County, but once you go into the next counties, they're more rural. And I think that it's the perspective in each is very reflective of the diversity that's in it. Like Nia said, like there is, like when you go into the rich white suburban communities, they're going to be more conservative. They're going to be a little bit less prone to change. So I definitely think it's definitely due to gerrymandering, and there's a clear racial and socioeconomic divide between different like neighborhoods. So I will pass that to Nia.
Yeah, I just want to kind of like, Marlie made me remember a little bit of stuff. As far as that whole divide goes, there is a highway that runs through Katy and about like all of Houston, and that is the dividing factor between like Katy and Houston, which Katy is like the suburb of Houston. So, but I-10 highway, once you cross 10 or you cross the 6, it's like a whole different world. And I've like heard like teachers and like peers be like, oh yeah, I don't go on that side of the highway. It's out of my range. And that's like really clear to see, like, how it all works and how we're so divided yet so close to each other. Because it's not even like that it's rural on the other side. It's just that it's not what people are used to. And so they think it's just humongous shocker, and like how can this neighborhood look like that? Well, it's like, well, I mean, this is still Katy, Texas. And they're like, no, it's not. That's like Katy 1.0. And we're Katy, like, and it's like, yeah, that's not how it is. But that whole, you can clearly see the divide. You can see it in people's mentalities too. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and pass this to Mayowa.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to highlight kind of what Nia was talking about in terms of our own communities, in terms of diversity. Something I feel like is really interesting, especially in attending a private school, is kind of the idea of diversity within institutions, but also diversity within communities, within our communities. For example, I found that like diversity in private schools has often kind of been very much like kind of like a peppering in of Black folks within those students, maybe some brown students, but it's very much still majority white. But something I feel like that we've been dealing with within our own Nashville school community and University School of Nashville has been how to make University School of Nashville reflect the Nashville community. For example, Nashville has like one of the largest populations, I'm pretty sure, of Kurdish folks outside of Kurdistan due to refugee and immigration, though we have a lack of those types of students within our school. That kind of leads into factors in terms of class within, like, even though you have a lot of diversity within students, they're of a certain socioeconomic class, which leads to like ignorant comments that students like will make towards others regarding class, like, oh, you can't afford like someone will break something and be like, oh, you can't afford that. Oh, you're going on like a class trip. Oh, you're staying at school. Like you're taking the bus. Why are you taking the bus? Like other like forms of little little microaggressions that aren't necessarily just focused on your identity in terms of race, but the class you belong to. I'll pass it on to Marlie.
Yeah, you said that, and I totally wanted to echo it. I think, again, like as someone who also goes to private school, that is such like who is mostly from like the same communities, I totally get that. And I also, you reminded me of, the divide that there kind of is. I think that in public schools in the rich, there's a public school for each like kind of suburbia area, and their diversity there's none. Like they recruit Black students for sports, and that is about it. And it's very weird to see. And also back to a point that Nia said, that we don't have a lot of immigration into places. We don't have people moving to Birmingham. That's not whatever, but we have a lot of people, a lot of especially like Black families who generationally they stayed in Birmingham because it was so like there's such a huge Black population here during the civil rights movement, and people just stayed here. So there's not a lot of forced change, and there's not a lot of immigration or anything. It's just a lot of generational stuff. Like a lot of the history in Birmingham is generational. And that also goes back to with class and the divides and everything. Everything here is very ingrained, I guess. So I will pass it to Amelia for our next question.
Okay. Yeah, going off of what Marlie said, we're going to move on into the next question, which is, what is an aspect of the criminal justice system that disproportionately affects your community? And how does the criminal justice system specifically impact youth in your community? So we'll start with Michael.
Thank you. I think one thing that really makes Nashville stick out, and it's a pretty saddening statistic, is that 37208 is the North Nashville area code. It's Mayowa referenced it earlier. It is the highest incarceration rate percentage-wise in the entire nation, and America has the highest one in the entire world. So basically, that's I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure that means it's the largest in the world, which is just crazy. And the other day, I'm in a civics class at my school, and we were talking to the police chief, and he was just telling us that like it's very hard in that community specifically, but in Nashville as a whole, to just like cause change and reform the system and kind of repair the bonds between like the criminal justice system and the community. And so I'll pass it on to Mayowa to talk about that a little bit more. And then also I'm curious to hear when Allie goes a little bit about the opioid epidemic. But Mayowa.
Yeah, I guess Michael reiterated that statistic about Nashville. I think that within our own local community, I think that the criminal justice system specifically impacts our own like Nashville community that I'm surrounded in by its lack of touching our community. I think that there are students within private schools, of course, get in trouble with the law and stuff like that. That happens, of course, but I have yet to hear a student be like arrested for something or arrested for something. For example, there are things that like I guess that students, for example, in public schools in Nashville that aren't too far away from us that would lead to trouble with law enforcement. For example, I'll have like I know students from like Hume Fogg, other schools and stuff like that, where they've got like students get arrested and students like drop out of school due to forms of incarceration that like kind of pervade the entire area. But like I just find it really interesting that like it never touches our community, except in the sense of like, I think that within maybe this might be a specific trend within private schools and other like high socioeconomic areas. I feel like in a sense, we kind of reap the benefits of the aesthetics that the criminal justice system has created. For example, like students will like kind of like, there are forms of like African-American culture that have been just like basically influenced through interactions with policing, criminal justice, and other forms in terms of like rap, music, even like style and fashion. Those are other forms of influence. It's really interesting that like students will like absorb those cultural phenomena and stuff like that. Like, oh, they'll like sing a song and stuff like that, and you'll like hear them saying like F12, like and stuff like that. But then also like I don't think the last like they have probably never had a negative interaction with a police officer. I think it's kind of this weird feedback loop that's kind of we're ignorant of and need to examine more. I'll pass it on to Nia.
Yes, what Mayowa said is like literally an exact replica of what goes on here in Katy, or at least at my high school. It's like our student body is absorbing their experiences with police without having actual experiences with law enforcement and the criminal justice system. Like every morning at 7 a.m., all the big Ford trucks roll in and they're all blasting like, NWA and like all this, African-American artists that, talk about the police and their experiences with it or with the institution of it. And then they get out and say stuff like, oh yeah, F12. And everyone's like, I know so much about police now. But it's like, you've never ever had an experience with the police. I mean, we have a police officer at our school. There's one, she is female, which means nothing, but to all the people that go to my school that are males that mostly do that type of behavior, it means a lot because it's like, oh, I hear the police that these rap artists are talking about and they're not female, they're not and so it also is a whole different like level to their understanding of what the criminal justice system means and like how it affects them. And like Mayowa said, it's like stems ignorance because it's like they don't really know what that means to people and what that means. It's a completely different meaning, I would say, to someone who is Black or brown in comparison to someone who is Caucasian about what the criminal justice system means. And while it's, I guess you can call it informative through the music they hear, because they hear experiences about it, it's also just like stemming a false world for them to think that this is all that the police is, and like, oh, the police gonna treat me the same way as like gonna treat somebody else. So that's my take on how it affects my Acadia area. I'm gonna pass this to Marlie.
Yeah, I think that the understanding of police is very different in between communities. When you talk to someone in a rich white community, they're gonna say like, "Oh, the police! I stopped one of the parties I was having one time, but they got noise complaints, so the police came." But when you talk to someone in the inner city, they, there's a lot of fear around police and there's a lot of policing down there for no reason. And so we have a big interstate here, I-20. It goes through Georgia, Mississippi, and here, and it's a big drug trafficking route. And I have heard certain law enforcement officers, admit to looking for Hispanic people on I-20 because they think that they're most likely to, to have drugs in their car. But it's also a huge human trafficking route, and that's more of a white crime, I guess. There's more Caucasians in human trafficking than anything else. But that's not as big of a concern to them because those are white people doing the crimes, not people of color. And so I think that the policing system here is very unjust. The police budget is about 40% of the entire public safety budget, which includes fire, other safety works like public works, which is a lot, and it's not necessary. And they're usually given more money in poor communities. The police department in poor communities are given more money to arrest more people in poor communities. And I think that that's the understanding of policing in white neighborhoods is especially outrageous. So I will pass this to Allie.
Okay, so I come from a very much Caucasian community, so I personally cannot speak on racial injustices that I see in the policing system, but Michael already told you that I was going to talk about the opioid epidemic, and he was correct. Scott County has definitely been hit hard by this opioid, if I can speak, opioid epidemic. Most of the arrests made here are for some type of drug possession, some type of drug charge. That is what most of the people in Scott County are incarcerated for. And I also see like a lot of people at school, at my school, I never really hear of anybody getting in like serious trouble at school. If anybody does get arrested at school, it's because they started a fight with a minor and they're 18, or they got caught with weed, or they got caught with chewing tobacco, or they got caught with some type of easily obtainable drug, I guess, like drug. When I say drug, I mean like, like a vape, or maybe they came to school with alcohol. It's never really anything like crazy. Another thing that is super common that they get in trouble for is having pocket knives at school, because we live in a community where honestly that's literally like the norm. That's the norm. Like if I was in class and I was like, and there was a guy sitting next to me, and I looked over and I was like, hey, I have a string on my shirt. It's literally like commonplace for him to just like whip out a pocket knife and in front of like the teachers and everything, and just like cut the string off my shirt. Like, thanks, because like that's just the norm here. So I think if there was one aspect of the criminal justice system in Scott County that I would change, it would be their actions towards those with addiction, because sometimes most of the time, it seems like they treat them like animals almost, and not humans with a disease, if that makes sense. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, that's what they are. I think Mayowa has our next question, maybe. Wait, Amelia, did you want to say something?
Just a little bit. Okay. Like just a little bit off of what Allie said. Like there are like those smaller things like that, and there's not a fear here at all, which it is like mainly Caucasian, but like I keep reading the comments. Like there's not a fear here except coming from certain people. Like if you are addicted and you get arrested for something like that, you're not going to have the same fear as maybe some people who are up on Brimstone would have their fear. Like coming from such a small town, it really, without going too far into it, it depends on who you are for you to have the fear of getting caught from the police. And even if you do get caught, most of the people are not afraid. So we'll go ahead and Mayowa, if you want to do the next question.
Yeah. My question is, what do education systems look like in your community? What available educational resources are there in terms of classes, APs, college credit, and extracurriculars? I guess we'll start with Marlie.
Yeah, again, like going to a private school, it's been, I have a lot of opportunities there. But when you go to like public schools, you have the rich white public schools teaching the Civil War as the war of Northern aggression, and a lot of stuff that is very wrong and uncomfortable. And what's really upsetting is that in the inner city system, the education system is so lacking. I mean, on average, like I think about the average third grader in inner city Birmingham doesn't know how to read, which is far behind the average in richer communities, which is just so horrifying. And there's a lot of programs to help public schools in the inner city Birmingham, but it's pretty upsetting, I guess, looking at the inequalities between schools. And I think that there's definitely not enough budgeting for public education here. So I will pass this to Michael.
Yeah, what I'm saying is pretty much going to echo what Marlie's saying. I think in Nashville, the statistic is like maybe a third of like third graders can't read, or sorry, a third of third graders can read, so 2/3 can't, which is pretty staggering. But the public and private like split is very, very evident. There's the private schools are kind of seen as just better in almost every regard. There's Hume Fogg, which is a public school, which is seen as pretty good. But otherwise, like the split there is pretty big. In terms of the school that I go to, there's obviously like the kind of hyper competitive nature, very resource rich. It's right next to Vanderbilt, and it was once a part of Vanderbilt. So that like has a compounded, there's a lot more resources at our fingertips. But I think we also have the privilege to like decouple ourselves from APs and standardized tests and like move away from that even more, which is just something to consider. But yeah, I'll pass it to Nia.
So yeah, here I go to a public school, and for public school, I would say it's very good. Katy ISD is known to be one of the best ISDs in the Texas Houston area, I would say. And yeah, I get the luxury of having things like AP classes, having plenty of extracurriculars, college credit. We have HCC, Houston Community College, that our school filters through for juniors and seniors that want to get ahead. We have a Miller Technological and Career Center, which you can take like EMT courses, you can take nursing courses, you can pharmaceuticals, and go like law, cosmetology, auto tech, things like that. And that is an extreme luxury for us, because not a lot of schools get to do that, and it makes our education system pretty good for public school. Like it's one of those that's up there, and we, like I said, we do get a lot of those opportunities. And I think that it's not like that in inner city, like Marlie was talking about. Like I said, with the highway thing, as soon as you cross over into 6, it's not at all like that. That's not what their goal is. Their goal is not to educate kids. Their goal is to try to get kids through school, but without, like, they're stripping the whole fun part of education from it in those inner city schools. And I think it's so sad to see, because my mom, she taught in Alief ISD, which is an ISD that is across the highway, and I would go there often and sit in her classroom, and it was just shocking to see the complete and drastic difference between the two schools. And it made me really sad too, because I am very passionate about the education quality between students. And it's just like, how does someone that lives 10 miles from me have such a different experience than I do? And I really don't think it should be that way at all. But I'm gonna go ahead and pass this to Allie.
I go to a public school. It's about as public school can get. Fights at 7:30 in the morning, dip, like chewing tobacco, like slammed into the carpet. My school was built in the 70s. My grandpa was actually the first senior class to ever walk across the stage. So I think that's super cool. But as for education quality goes, I've always been like a teacher's pet. So this is like in no way me bashing my teachers. I love them all. But it's more like, let's get these kids through school. Let's get them to walk across the stage. Let's send them to college with extremely conservative views on the world. And then let's watch them and see how they do. Like, yes, I know that y equals mx plus b is the line formula thingy, but am I really educated on what's going on in the world? No, because it's hushed at our school, because that's just what you do, because God forbid you develop any of your own opinions. There are about 5 elementary schools, I think. Yeah, 5 elementary schools in our county, and really all of, 6 if you want to count Onata, but technically they're not a part of the county school system. And from my perspective, I could be wrong. All of the money is kind of funneled into one of the elementary schools, and so that leaves 4 other elementary schools wondering, why am I not as good as these kids? Like, what have I done wrong? That's how I was in middle school, because I did not go to the middle school, or I didn't go to the elementary school that had obtained all that funding. So it leaves an entire, like, hundreds of kids just wondering what they've done wrong not to deserve this funding. So in my county, it's definitely, I agree, it's let's get these kids through school without really educating them on what's going on in the world. So I'll pass this over to Mayowa.
Yeah, I guess in terms of our school, I'd say that our education system is really good. I'm not going to say that like USN is like a bad like school in terms of education. I feel like that we have a lot of resources, and something else I feel like that something that a lot of students don't have is a really good relationship with our teachers. I feel like a lot of the teachers that I have, like I know after I graduate, they will be like lifelong friends for me. They're like really kind people and really genuine people, which I really like. In terms of like educational resources though, and like systems, something that we've kind of like in terms of my school, like we have this in terms of like offering courses and offering a large amount of courses that students can take, but we're kind of taking the further step in terms of diversifying the narratives within our courses. Something that's happening as well as in terms of like a lot of schools in America are dealing with is the fact that a lot of our textbooks and a lot of our school curriculum are feature a lot of white voices that aren't necessarily reflective of the entire world. For example, I remember I took AP US history last year. I remember we were doing a unit on like Reagan. I remember I was looking through it and I was like, oh, where's everything about the war on drugs and stuff like that? And then we looked at it, it wasn't there. I was wondering, why isn't this there? I looked at our textbook and we like looked up the person who wrote it. He worked at the DEA. Of course, he worked at the DEA and wrote the textbook. Of course, there's not going to be anything about the war on drugs from the DEA. So I feel like we need to do more of a, like, I feel like in terms of the next step, in terms of our school, is creating including different voices and privileging certain narratives and different perspectives on events that we thought were clear cut. For example, like, yeah, I guess that's for us. I'll pass it on to Amelia.
Okay, starting with what Allie said, there are the 5 county schools previously, and then I go to the city school, as we like to get labeled. Onata is kind of considered, we've gotten rich kids a lot, which is like very, very unfair, because we really should get more of a oh, they're better at faking it kind of reputation, because they think that, like, we live all essentially in the same area, and they think we have so much more money because we go to the school closer to our house. And that alone, where we're not in the county school system, has absolutely obliterated most of the funding up until recently, because Oneida doesn't even get that little part that a lot of the county schools did get. And that has really, really hurt a lot of the students that are younger at Oneida, and they don't get those same resources because they don't expect them to have it, because they go to Oneida, they have money, but it's just another public school. And going into AP classes too, we don't have those. I've talked to someone before and I was like, hey, why can't we have those? And their answer was, yeah, we don't have enough people. So basically saying, like, if you are on a smaller scale, obviously, like, that fraction, like, no matter it's a bigger school or a smaller school, there's going to be that small portion regardless that is going to have that advanced mindset and going to be able to go further. But where you are in a lack of opportunity in a smaller place, you go through, and by the time you get to your senior year and you fill out your college applications, you say, like, hey, I can't put AP classes because I wasn't given that option, but you can't put that on the application. So it just looks like you did not do it. And probably as far as solutions go towards that problem, maybe like they do focus so much about, they focus a lot on, like, oh yeah, let's do math, let's do English, let's do all of this. But whenever you get put off in the real world, whenever you have no plan to further your education, good luck, good job, do good, figure out how to do your taxes, figure out how to get a job, figure out where to go, find your resources on your own, and just pretty much everything like that. And I think that has a really, really like big factor in how the adults in Scott County turn out after going through that process and then not being able to help their children. And it just kind of starts back over. Okay, I think we're going back to Mary, actually.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you all for this wonderful discussion. Just as we reach our final few minutes of this panel, we wanted to turn the questions towards solutions now, because we hope to turn this conversation into an ongoing discussion about how we might be able to best support one another in our efforts on a community level. So Caleb.
Yeah. So as Mary said, we kind of want to take this into more of a dialogue and have this keep on going. And one of the ways that we want to take this from a conversation like we just had, but to a more kind of collaborative discussion, is to identify some of the overlaps in our experiences. So I just wanted to ask the panelists, what crossovers did you all experience, or what did you identify in your own experiences today? Yeah, so we can pass it over to Marlie.
Yeah, I think a lot of us talked about there's a kind of divide, whether that's across socioeconomic places, geographical location, race, whatever. I think there's a lot of divide, but we all feel very frustrated by those divides. We seem to really want, and again, I guess that's the name of the game, is across county lines. We all really want to progress, and those divides are kind of hurting us a bit. So I think that all of us are really just looking for, I know it's cheesy, but we're all looking for more unity in our communities. And that can be really hard when a lot of the people in your communities don't want unity. So I will pass this to Nia.
Yeah, I think more specifically, like basically bouncing off what Marlie said, I think we all really seem to be really frustrated about our education systems in some way, shape, or form. And I think that can definitely be fixed by just across the board of America, just diversifying narratives and making sure that high school students are coming out educated and not just, oh, they know what 2 + 2 is, but like actually knowing like how to apply for a loan, how to like, do things, or how to do your taxes, like do things that will actually help you in the world, instead of saying that like we put you through 12 years, take this and figure it out yourself, like actually making some sort of step to like just overseeing the well-being of the students that are coming out of the school system and these education systems. I'm gonna go ahead and pass this to Mayowa.
Yeah, I feel like in terms of looking towards solutions in terms of like uniting kind of rural and urban areas, I feel like kind of like broader coalition building within rural and urban areas. I think that in terms of like in terms of like similarities, there's a socioeconomic kind of there's a socioeconomic factor that stretches across where both communities have often been disenfranchised. For example, what Allie and Amelia were highlighting in terms of the opioid crisis. Often many of the same people who are profiting off of the like death of rural folks in terms of the opioid crisis also are exploiting urban communities in Nashville. I think that forms like issues like that offer a form of coalition building in terms that can build like kind of like unite the voices between those two areas to receive forms of accountability for like historical wrongs that are occurring that are not achieving or not creating any forms of accountability. Yeah. I'll pass it on to Allie.
I think one of the things that I've definitely understood more today is that no matter where we're from, there is a disconnect somewhere in our system, whether that be in the education system, in the criminal justice system. I think everywhere here or everywhere ever has a disconnect somewhere. And I think that we're all frustrated with that disconnect. So I'll pass this on to Michael.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Allie and Marlie, kind of combining both of what they said. But I feel like there's so many different things happening in our world today, and I think in general, everyone's kind of looking for their own kind of anchor and their own kind of like thing to latch onto, whether that's the church or whether that's a community organization where you live, your school, something like that. There are so many different conversion issues that it's often hard to find that common ground, and I think that a solution is really just like to kind of do what we're doing today and like finding common ground within the larger scheme of life can kind of help us come up with solutions together. So I'll pass it off to Amelia for the final word of the day.
Yeah, so quickly put, after a group of very well said people, regardless of our problems, whether it's on one side or the other, on education or the criminal injustice or pretty much anything we've talked about today, there is a different problem, but I guess starting with all of us here explaining the problems allows us to have those solutions and maybe use the same problem solving technique to work for it in either situation. I think that has a lot to do with what we're doing today. I guess that's all I got.
Awesome. And then with that, what types of change might we look like at across county lines? And I think we can kind of couple this with the last question that we had as well, which was, I know earlier we had asked what change looks like in your communities, but we also wanted to know what change and solutions look like to you. With Mayowa?
In terms of change and solutions, in terms of our community, something that I feel like has been happening within our own national community has been forms of organizing. I feel like for a lot of blue counties that are in red areas, I feel like the question that we've had on the outset of the 2020 election and kind of dealing with the way that Senate races have kind of like played out is, what do we do in a red state where the government doesn't necessarily want to do that? Do like the things we want. I think there are community organizations, for example, like Workers' Dignity, Gideon's Army, Free Hearts, and other organizations that have kind of taken into account and done this thing kind of like a dual power type thing, where they're trying to get people to run for local representation, but also cultivating communities through mutual aid and creating stronger communities, because that is honestly the best way to creating change. So yeah, I'd like to, in terms of change in our own local communities that are happening, I'd like to see stronger communities that are more involved with each other and know what's happening. I guess I'll pass it on to Michael.
Yeah, I would say that kind of in terms of causing change in our community and how to bridge that together, I would say that I'm so sorry, I totally forgot the question. I was listening to Mayowa and I wasn't thinking about my response at all. I'm going to pass this to Allie.
I think for me, I think the biggest change that I would like to see in Scott County is I would love to see more diversity come to our area. Literally nothing would make me happier. I would love to see that happen. And I really don't think that is so far out of reach for us. And I think for a long time that everyone has always thought that it is. And I really don't think it is. I'll pass it to Amelia.
Okay. So change, at least the way I see it, especially for Scott County, I think it should start with acceptance because I see really a lot of denial here and everyone kind of like still wants to stick to that same thing that we've always known. But I think once we put that big word of awareness out there and we kind of show everyone else, we can kind of start to change what has always kind of been the same for all that, because it's not how the world is going to be soon. So changing social norms, we should probably just kind of work towards that and change the mindsets. But a lot of times people don't know enough about the problem to understand how big it is in order to change that mindset. So Nia, if you want to continue.
Yeah, as far as Katy, Texas goes and change and just having a solution, I want to see that idea of hesitation that I talked about earlier just disappear. Like I want to see it kind of disintegrate, and not because, oh, there's all of this new things I have to adapt to, like not because it's forced. I don't want the idea of change to be forced. I want it to be an idea that it's like I'm full willing to change because I see you and I see that you are not going to be comfortable in this environment that I've created here. So I want to change for you, and I want it to be more of a collective thing instead of just somebody forcing themselves to change and somebody forcing themselves to integrate inside of an environment that's not for them. I would love to see that. I'm gonna go ahead and pass this to Marlie.
Yeah, I want to totally echo what Mayowa said earlier, that community organizing is really what I think change looks like, especially here in Birmingham. Like I said earlier, change is so often seen as a one-step, a one-time, short-term solution, and it's really not. So I really want to see more community organizing, people coming together and just coming together and being passionate. I think change looks like passionate people who are just excited and motivated to get to work. So I really look forward to more communities building and getting passionate and getting excited about change. So I think that that's the most important, is people getting motivated and passionate about things that they want to do and willing to do the work. So I will pass this to Michael.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with Amelia a lot on this. Well, I agree with everyone, but I will say I think, generally from a psychological perspective, like Amelia was saying, kind of at the beginning of the talk, humans, as progressive as we might be, we're generally kind of very not into change. We don't want to change unless we have to, and you can start with whatever climate change or any other issue. We don't really act until we're forced to act. And I would just say that by us six today, everyone watching today, no matter what, like standing up and like being the first to start the change, I think it's pretty easy from then to get others to, once others see what's wrong, it's easier to get people involved rather than if you wait for someone else to act. I think change won't happen. So yeah, I'll pass it to Mary.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. So we're getting about the time where we can move into breakout rooms. If you're on and you're participating, this is your chance to be a part of the conversation within your breakout room. So I will open them up, and we have about 20 minutes. And then toward the end, in the last minute, you'll get a message that tells you that it's closing in 60 seconds, but you can stay on for that minute and finish up your conversation. All right, so I will open those up now. Thank you everyone for joining today, and a huge thank you to all of our panelists who put a lot of work into this and have been meeting, like we said, for 2 months to discuss this. We're very grateful to all of you who showed up to listen to them, and especially to them for sharing their thoughts and their insights and kind of opening up new doors and possibilities for how we address some of these problems that we're all facing across the United States in different communities. Caleb, do you have any closing thoughts?
I'm just extremely excited about this event. I'm just thrilled with how it went. I'm thrilled with the kind of conversations we had. And I'm just really excited to see where this goes in the future, this partnership, and kind of how we can keep talking about change across county lines and where it goes forward. So I'm just really grateful to have done my small part in this event.
Thank you all. And just so you know, this is something that we are trying to open up into an ongoing task force to think about how we can address problems across county lines and work together to collaborate for change. I will send out an email after this event that details that a little bit more. but if you're interested, please do let us know. And additionally, if you haven't already taken the pledge to listen, please do so. I know we put it in the chat at the very beginning, but just wanted to reiterate it again. And we also have a listening or pledge to listen facilitator program where we model conversations like these. So if you'd like to train to become a listening facilitator, please, we can do that as well. Again, all of this will be in the post-event email. And also follow Stand and Millions of Conversations on social media so that you can stay in the loop with everything that we're doing. So thank you all. And yeah, I hope you have a good evening. Oh, wait, passing it over to Summer.
Yes, thank you, Mary. I just wanted to say what a fantastic job that you and Caleb have done today, and everybody at Stand and all the participants, just brilliant. I've been inspired, taking lots of notes, and just wanted to really thank everybody for bringing so much passion, thoughts, and commitments to today's conversation. And I hope that this will be the first of many, and especially just in terms of how we build community together. So as one person said, one of the participants said, how do we actually realize unity? And I think that there's no way we're going to be able to do that unless we have these collective conversations with each other. So, but again, thank you, Mary and Caleb.
Just one more thank you to our participants, Nia, Michael, Mayowa, Allie, Amelia, and Marlie. You all were wonderful, and thank you so, so much for all of the work and you put into this. We really, really appreciate it. Awesome. All right, well, I'll let everyone go. So I'm going to end the meeting now. Thank you.